Warm welcome, everyone. My name is Zgut-Przybylska, and I'm an assistant professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology in the European Studies Unit. And we're very happy to have you today in our next seminar, which is, as you know, is the making of European society towards the sociology of European integration. And I'll be very happy to chair this special event today with a special guest, two actually. We are very thrilled to have András Bozóki with us from the Central European University. We'll talk about his new book on the case of Hungary as an embedded democracy. And he co-authored this work, this magnum opus with Zoltán Fleck, a constitutional scholar from Hungary. And they together explain the pathways of my home country, which went down the road of autocratization. And most importantly, they tell the story how this could have happened under the watch of the European Union. This is a very important element also from the perspective of our seminar, but also from the historical perspective of what happened in Hungary. So quickly to introduce András, whom many of you, I'm sure you know by reputation. He has an outstanding career where he's been juggling different hats in different important roles. And here, I'm not going to list all of them because that's going to take up a lot of time. So I'm just going to highlight a few. He's a professor of political science at the Central European University. He's a doctor of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and a research affiliate at the Democracy Institute, CU Democracy Institute in Budapest, Hungary. He's been studying politics of Central Europe, democratization, democratization, autocratization, and political ideas, and the role of the intellectuals. And he also co-authored dozens of books, and he was a visiting lecturer in many and research fellow in many different universities all around the world. And before he fled this full-time academic career, he's been also the Minister of Culture in Hungary. András, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We are also very lucky to have Andrzej Sadecki with us, who is the head of the Central European Department and the Center for Eastern Studies, OSW, here in Poland, where he's coordinating the Think Visegrad V4 think tank platform. Andrzej is a well-known expert on Hungary in Poland, and he's also been conducting research on Viktor Orbán's politics of historical memory. He's been cooperating with the Charles University in Prague, among others. So gentlemen, welcome you both. And just a couple of housekeeping rules before I give the floor to our speakers. Now, András will speak for 40 minutes, and then Andrzej will take the floor for comments in 10 minutes, and then I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So please think about questions and either raise your hand at the end of the conversation or just write them down in the chat, and I'm going to read them out loud. So András, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. On a personal note, let me thank you for your invitation, Edith, Andrzej, and Joanna. And also let me tell you how Poland was always important for me from the 1970s, actually, when I was a teenager and was traveling all over with hiking, with catching different cars and traveling from Krakow to Gdańsk, and watching also the beginning of Solidarity movement, and also following the writings of Polish sociology, which was the most developed in Eastern Europe. So Polish sociology for us was a sort of model how to develop thinking about society and politics. So therefore it is a special country for me. And again, Poland was the forerunner in democratic transition, and Hungary came second with the roundtable talks, and I was studying it. So in many ways, practically, personally, academically, I was coming across studying Poland and seeing the developments there. Also up until 2002, 2006, governments were always losing elections, both in Hungary and Poland, and after everything changed. So this is the book I'd like to, oops, I don't know how to, why not, it is not moving, my slide. We wrote an article in 2017, 2018 It was published in English with Daniel Hegedűs about the role of the European Union vis-à-vis Hungary, when we realized that there is an increasingly autocratic country among the democratic member states of the EU. So that was the starting point to speak about sort of a black sheep, what the European Union can do with a country which is non-democratic. That is unprecedented in the history of the European Union. And that was pretty well received, a lot of citation. And then we wanted to progress toward a book, but then Daniel had to do other things, and he is working in Berlin in a German Marshall Fund, and he could not join me writing the book. So I decided to invite my colleague at the Budapest University, Zoltán Fleck, who is a sociologist of law. So from this point, although we had a clear idea about the European Union and Hungary relationship, which was already outlined in our article with Hegedűs, we started a new direction. We were talking a lot about the role of Orbán himself, whether it is an agency-driven transformation or not. And, at the beginning, after 2010, many people believed in Hungary, in the democratic camp, that if Orbán loses election, then it will be easy to reverse, and it would be easy to return to democracy. And this is now what Poland is struggling now. After 8 years of peace government, there is a return, even if Poland never was a non-democratic country in the last 30 years. It was a sort of illiberal democracy, but always democracy. So it could be much, much more difficult for Hungary in the future to come back. And when we discussed it with my co-author, with Zoltán Fleck, we had to conclude that purely political science approach is not enough. We can say that this is a sort of hybrid regime or electoral autocracy. We tend to say it is autocracy because hybrid regime is a very broad category, and electoral autocracy is the endpoint of the hybrid regimes. And we realized that it is not simply Viktor Orbán what is the problem here, it is the Hungarian society. So the political science approach, important as it is, but the autocratic regime is somehow accepted, passively promoted by large segments of the society. Hungary is a 9.6 million country, 7.5 million voters. 2.5 million is passive, they don't participate, the remaining is 5 million. If you get 2.6 million votes, you can win the election, you can have a two-thirds majority in the parliament with a totally absolute minority votes. And this is what Orbán knows very well, that he needs to have like 2.6 to 3 million votes to have a majority, and then he can disregard the 2 million votes voting against him. So he actually doesn't need a 98% of the votes. He doesn't need even 50% in reality due to the extremely disproportional electoral system in Hungary. And somehow now we had to realize that this is a historical period. It is not just, we cannot have a moment when we analyze the structures. We had to have a longitudinal analysis starting from 2010 up until 2024. We finished the book in January 24, just a month before the rise of Péter Magyar and the Tisza party, which is now the real opposition. So we can cover a relatively homogeneous period with some internal changes. And we said that we need to take a look on the sociological part because this autocracy is somehow passively accepted. It is more inclusive and therefore embedded. So that is our sort of theoretical innovation to suggest that this is a embedded autocracy, And this is what we wanted to explore. So these are some basic research questions. Why Hungary is interesting? We have so many cases in the world of democratic backsliding. There are regularities, irregularities, similarities, differences. But the specialty of Hungary is that this is a member state of the EU. So that if it is a case study about a small country, which would be normally uninteresting, it is now a paradigmatic case study because it says a lot about the state of the arts in the European Union. What would be the reaction of the European Union? Can the European Union keep up a normative stance vis-à-vis Hungary, or they should take a more pragmatic approach to Hungary? So how it functions, and then we wanted to realize that the Orbán regime was approached and analyzed in very, very diverse ways, both conceptually and historically. The regime definitions are endless. I will show you in a minute. And also, when we study authoritarian takeover, we really had to address this issue of structure and agency. So we had a bad luck with the leader who was extremely talented in destruction, but we have a social structure which is sort of favorable for doing this because people in Hungary somehow accustomed to that there is a formal structure over their heads, but beneath the formal structure there is a set of informal practices which are different and diverse and importantly informal. Whether it is the Warsaw Pact or the Communist bloc, or it is the European Union or NATO, this is above the heads of the ordinary people. They just don't care. They focus on their own everyday life, which is pretty much unchanged. These mentalities from the communist period to the democratic period and now to the autocratic period. And that's something which needs to be explained. And therefore, we had to realize that there is a prehistory of the Orbán regime. It did not start in April 2010. Maybe the democratic system, the liberal democracy, the 21 years of liberal democracy was not, perhaps it was not so beautiful as we remember now. We are very nostalgic about this, and all democracy measuring institutes acknowledge that that was a consolidated liberal democracy. It sounds a little bit ridiculous today, but if you take a look on VDEM and Freedom House and all these, they acknowledge that it is maybe a little bit of sometimes deconsolidating, but basically, fundamentally, it is a liberal democratic regime. And now we have to ask the question that maybe there was a problematic regime because it was a bit alienated from the society. It was over institutionalized and far from the everyday practice, everyday life of people. So these are the research questions, and you can see the second slide of this. How did the deconsolidation of democracy, were there critical junctures, different periods? What can we learn from the first Fidesz era between 98 and 2002? In the common memory, it is a democratic regime, and it was a democratic regime, a democratic government, but still there were some authoritarian discourse and executive aggrandizement, centralization of power within the democratic structure. So already we could see the seeds of this, but of course it could have been different afterwards. And we have to interpret the different levels of change. And the reason why I invited Professor Zoltán Fleck, that he is a legal scholar, a sociologist of law. And while in the article with Daniel Hegedűs, we were focusing more on the EU-Hungary relationships, here we brought the problem of autocratic legalism, the continuation of law against the rule of law, actually, which might sound a little bit strange, but the law is used for autocratic purposes against the rule of law. And also the participating in the international discourse against Black Lives Matter, against gender, against immigration, migrants. That was also a strategy of Orbán to hide the domestic autocratization and presenting himself as a conservative international democratic leader, which he was not. So then we measuring and approaching and describing the characteristics of autocratic accommodation. Actually, we had a problem that we know much more about Hungary, but we had to somehow offer a condensed, a dense description, a thick description, but still, as Edith mentioned, we had to produce a readable book in the same time. So it was a challenge how to introduce Hungary to foreign audience. We did not overload the book with a lot of names, which might be meaningful for Hungarians, but they don't say anything to foreign readership. And we focused on the first 4 years, and after 2014, we see it as a real backsliding to autocracy. The legislation towards autocracy occurred in the first 4 years, and the economic and political transformation after 2014. And the refugee crisis was used it very effectively. Everybody in Hungary was waiting for some sort of consolidation. When will Orbán finally stop this backsliding and achieve some sort of semi-democracy? But he was going on and not stopping and always finding new enemies. That is very important for him to find enemies, which is a basic rule in politics, to have always enemies, friends and foes, as Carl Schmitt mentioned. And Orbán is a great student of some other political scientists, but Carl Schmitt as well. So the enemies were the Roma at the beginning, but then Fidesz realized that the Roma votes are important, so they stopped attacking the Roma. And he always needs some enemies, potentially those enemies who are not striking back. So the Islamic refugees, what he called migrants, blurring the boundaries between political refugees and economic migrants, claiming that these are all just economic migrants and potential terrorists from the Middle East, and introducing a state of exception, actually, exceptional rules. And Hungary is living since 2015 in the state of exception. Believe it or not, it's very strange. Under different names, the parliament every half year, they continue this state of exception. So that is the authoritarian consolidation, maintaining the state of exception, referring to the migration, referring to COVID, referring to the war in Ukraine. Now we have this is the reference. And the enemies are the Roma, the refugees, Western liberals, George Soros in 2017-19, and then Brussels, the European People's Party, and then Ukraine. Now it seems like Orbán became the voice of Putin within the European Union, which is, as a Hungarian citizen, I feel ashamed, actually, on a personal note. Here is a VDEM data in Hungary. You can see the communist period and the very quick transition to democracy. And then something like 20 years of democracy with a bit of deconsolidation between 2010 and then incremental but definitive decline since 2010, which is uninterrupted and going down, down, down. So the literature sometimes suggests that the transition is rather slow and the autocratization can be very quick. We might feel it quick, but historically it is not so quick. It is incremental decline. Transition was quick and the autocratization is a little bit slow. It is a very well timed, patiently executed autocratization. So what is interesting is that the ruler was patient enough to wait to execute the next step and implement the next. And for newcomers, I say I cannot suppose that you all know the book. Of course, let me just tell you a little bit about the books. It is a combination of historical chapters and analytical chapters. So chapter 1 is largely written by my co-author Zoltán Fleck. It is an analytical one. We also have an analytical introduction. And we have then 4 chapters between 2 and 5, which is more a historical description. And chapter 6 is the relationship with the EU. It's a combination of description and analysis. And that is, it is based on the previous article by Daniel Hegedűs, but it is rewritten to a certain extent. And it is a novelty, the transformation of judiciary, the rise of autocratic legalism. The root of this way of thinking goes back to Kimlén Sepeli and András Sajó, elaborated by Zoltán. And the other one, aspects of legitimacy and personalization of power, that is my work. Again, how can embedded the autocracy be legitimized, and what are the ways of autocratic legitimacy through combining propaganda, ideology, and mentalities. And now just a flash to show how people try to describe this regime. I mean, there is no consensus in the literature, but I must say that my colleagues are very innovative and creative in describing the Hungarian regime. János Kornai called it autocracy, but not yet dictatorship. Rudolf Ungvári called it transmuted fascism or post-fascism. Gáspár Tamás, Miklós, others populist democracy. Some people called it illiberal democracy, managed illiberal democracy, managed democracy, that is Putin, that goes to the Russian case, sovereign democracy, also Putin. Electoral autocracy already in 2015. I called it at one point liberal autocracy, highlighting the impact of the rule of law represented by the European Union. Bogaerts, diffusely defective democracy, referring to Wolfgang Merkel's definition, and our own approach in 2018, externally constrained hybrid regime, referring to the EU. Postmodern despotism, Agnes Heller, which says that this is not a 28th century dictatorship, this is a 21st century approach, which is based on information and surveillance and existential threats and not direct use of violence. It is surprising that this is a sort of non-violent autocracy. Why? Because of structural factors. Orbán needs to have the European funds, and therefore he cannot start a war against the opposition, a bloody war, although the opportunity is already there. He included to the constitution that the Hungarian police and even the Hungarian military can use force against the protesters. Maybe next year after the elections it will have some significance, like the Maidan events in Ukraine. Some people speculate about such an outcome, that maybe Budapest will have a next Maidan, that maybe the TISA party would win the election, but maybe that would be cheated, and then there would be a popular protest, and the big question will be what is going to happen there. Whether the regime will make a break with this non-violent tradition. So Heller called it postmodern because it is a 21st century autocracy based on surveillance and algorithms and those highly informational instrumental elements of popular control of society. Autocratic legalism, and Körösényi and others called it plebiscitary leader democracy. I agree with this leader, the component of leader, the personalism, but I would not use democracy anymore, and we rather refer to people who did not use democracy. Bálint Magyar and Bálint Madlovics called it patronal autocracy, and so on. And other people called it focus not the regime, but the state. You know the difference between regime and state. The regime is broader category. It is also about the society and the discourse and legitimacy. But the state, it is also extremely colorful how these people approach the state. Frankenstate, party state, mafia state, neo-prebendal state, predatory state, postmodern Bonapartism, Caesarism, tribalism, criminal state, accumulative state, propaganda state, the system of cheating, patrimonialism, and David Jancic, a captured state, a sort of crossroad between family and bureaucracy. So the family rules around Orbán, but there is a bureaucratic power behind it. So those are, I find them very well argued and very interesting. And this is what we try to start. This is a textbook case of de-democratization. And we argue that there is a deconsolidation preceded the autocratization between 2006 and 2010. Still formally, institutionally, the regime was liberal democracy, but the decline was clearly detected in terms of social trust. The leader lost credibility, and there was a leadership crisis, a crisis of public policy. And Fidesz was not just the opposition to the government, but they behaved like they are opposition to the system. They were collaborating with semi-loyal parties like Jobbik first, and then Miép first, the Csurka party, and later Jobbik, which was a really far-right anti-Roma party. While the Csurka party was traditionally anti-Semitic, the Jobbik party forgot anti-Semitism and turned to Islamophobia and anti-Roma strategy because that was more beneficial for them. So we have a combined approach, political science and sociology of law, and all of them were formally legalized. And we have a special chapter at the European Union claiming that the European had a constraining, enabling, and legitimizing role, a Janus-faced role. So sort of supporting by 55 billion euros given to Hungary, which is a tremendous amount of money. It is like the oil for Azerbaijan or oil for the Emirates or Qatar. So it's a unlimited income for the ruling clique, the ruling elite, and they use it and hiding behind the facade of democracy. But that was an empty facade. And they formally did not deny democracy, but hollowing out from inside. So the authoritarian takeover was peaceful, rather quick implementation of legislation, new electoral law, but starting with a new constitution. And that's the big difference between Hungary and Poland, because the new constitution legitimized all other legislation, and therefore all of these could be peaceful. You know, in Poland, as you remember, Kaczynski was fighting. It was a noisy fight with the judiciary. In Hungary, it was no noisy fight because they just changed the rule silently and easily, having the two-third constitutional majority. So this is our dual definition, electoral autocracy and embedded autocracy. The electoral autocracy is clear for everyone. I don't want to speak about it. But embedded autocracy is about the political formula and about discourses of power towards society. And we found that there are three components of the Orbán regime. Of course, that is a sort of simplification, but I think it's important. Many people say that this is a populist regime per se. There are important populist elements, populist discourse, populist demagogy, ethnopopulism, ethnic populism. But a populist leader wants to be more popular, wants to speak to everyone, and Orbán is focusing on his own voters only. And he claims that the others are enemies of the people. And increasingly, he disregarded the institutions, not just used the institutions, but also disregarded, and became a personal leader. The party became insignificant, the incumbent party. Fidesz is not interesting. Nobody cares who is the member of Fidesz and who is not. Some people are much more influential who are not even members of the ruling party, like Lőrinc Mészáros is just a childhood friend of Orbán, and a lot of other people around the family. So it makes sense now to speak about an informal personalist power around the family and some sort of legalism towards the society. So personalism is the way to hide the new elitism of the regime. So it is sometimes populism, sometimes elitism. It's a pragmatic use of both discourses. And the way to use is to driving away from democracy, and it is now sort of openly authoritarian in some respect, deviating from the EU, accepting Putin's strategies on the different scandals occurring now in foreign policy. So it is Orbán behaves like the agents of Russia, and there is an autocracy promotion going on, accepting and implementing more and more autocratic practices. The other thing is also interesting, the discourses of power. Usually we can differentiate between ideology, mentality, and propaganda. If you remember the totalitarianism as it was described by Hannah Arendt, she mentioned that there is ideology, terror, and propaganda. That is Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Union. Very strong reliance on ideology, extremely strong propaganda, plus terror. Now there is no terror, some hidden structural violence, but no direct violence. And it seems that ideology is not so important anymore. Orbán was already a liberal, a conservative, a populist, a nationalist, whatever you like, a pro-European, an anti-European. At the moment, he is populist and elitist at the same time, illiberal and neoliberal at the same time. This economic policy is neoliberal in some ways, but very much traditionalist for the state sectors. So ideology is very much applied. It is not genuine, and it is not important because the leader needs more flexibility, and ideology is has some sort of rules and dogmas, and Orbán wants to disregard because it limits his freedom as a leader. So what he is doing is a heavy propaganda for keeping his own people faithful, and reliance of mentality. And mentality is interesting. Juan Linz was talking about authoritarian Spain under Francisco Franco. And Linz was the first who pointed out that ideology is not always important for dictatorships. It's enough to be socially conservative, religious, traditional, and not politicizing everything. So it is familiar for Hungarians actually, because many of us lived in the Kádár regime, and the Kádár regime was a little bit like a stagnation, no ideology, forget about communism, just enjoy yourself in the private life. So it was based on mentality, not ideology and not propaganda. So no propaganda, no ideology, just a sort of conservative, traditional mentality. And if Orbán goes back to this mentality, that is familiar for millions of Hungarians. And in the meantime, as I said, there is a discrepancy between formal institutions, formal legislation, and informal practices. And if you take a look on the transformations in Hungary, there is always a continuous reference on the law. Everything is lawful in Hungary, but the content is totally different. 1989 was a lawful revolution. To quote, for instance, István Deák, referring to 1848, which actually was a lawful revolution. And even 1918, Count Mihály Károly was a lawful transformation, and even the Hungarian communist regime was peaceful lawful transformation in 1919. So it's quite amazing that this lawful transformation is a sort of repetitive element of Hungarian political change, and also the period of constitutional democracy, the introduction of rule of law. It was above the head of people, as I said, and then the transition to autocratic legalism, that was also legal. Why? Because it was based on cheating, as András mentioned. That is a ruling by cheating, and Schepeli is important here, that if we believe that democratic constitutionalism is worth defending, we have to stop believing that all constitutions are liberal, democratic, and they can defend themselves. So, as I said, my time is nearing to the end. That there is a institutional and cultural set of elements which somehow color the meanings of embeddedness. So there is an instrumentalization of law and democratic institutions. And when Orbán came to power, they said that let's liberate us from the aristocracy, from these lawyers, because that is an elite, a legal elite is ruling over us, and it's high time to give back the power to the people. Power to the people. It sounds very democratic, very direct, participatory democracy, but it was again just a demagogic mentioning. So selling autocratization as democratization, that was actually pretty smart. That I am going to democratize, give you back democracy, but in reality, they got rid of the rule of law and liberal democracy. Contemporary democracy is liberal democracy, as we know. So this democratic populism highlighted finally the autocratic direction. And unfortunately, there is a passivity in Hungarian society. Unlike in Poland, Poland has a very strong civil society that I always admired, back to the solidarity. And the culture of resistance is much stronger in Poland. And the roots go back to the 19th century. Also the intellectuals, poets, and the role of the Catholic Church. In Hungary, the role of the Catholic Church was just, being a servant of the communist regime, and now being the servant of the Orbán regime. So it was corrupted and therefore incorporated to the regime, and people could not organize themselves collectively. So there is what is lacking in the Hungarian society, which exists in Poland, the lack of these local solidarity networks. So that is very important, to have this local solidarity network that can be the roots of resilience and comeback of democracy and resistance. So these patterns of resistance are missing in Hungary, unfortunately, due to the individualizing impact of the Kádár regime. And now I think that is familiar to those of you who are experts of the European Union. Today, Hungary would not be included to the EU. They don't meet the Copenhagen criteria. They don't meet the Lisbon Treaty, the Article 2. The Union is founded on the values of respect of human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. Of course, this is a normative statement, but still, this is something like some sort of constitution or constitution-like text of the European Union. Member states promote pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity with different groups, and equality between men and women. It is a multi-level policy, and this is what the Orbán regime used, that although these countries are part of the European Union, because that is a federal superstructure, and still Orbán presented the EU as a sort of new enemy. And that is a well-known structure for populists to come to power. Populists like to be opposition, and they give the perception that we are always in opposition. And Orbán was opposition against the left liberal government until 2010. And after 2010, Orbán is in power, but he presents himself as populist leading the country, as opposition to the European Union, opposition to the world, actually, for a time being, against the United Nations, against the liberal constitutional order, and opposition to the European Union at the same time when the European Union is funding the autocratizing Hungary. And the European Union was extremely slow of reacting. I remember we were giving warning signs in 2011, 2012, János Kornai, and a lot of other people that, look, there is a danger, early warning. And they said, well, it is unimportant. It's a small country in the backyard of Germany. Angela Merkel will be taking care of Hungary. Don't worry. But after 2015, the change in Poland, the Brexit, and the first election of Donald Trump, suddenly everything changed, and Orbán found himself not as a bystander, not as an outlier, but in the mainstream. So he was a forerunner of a sort of civilizational change, the end of the post-war period. Now Timothy Gartonesh is just writing yesterday about the end of the 80 years of the end of the Second World War, which was a particularly beautiful, peaceful period of a liberal world order and which is now about to end. So Orbán can internationally present himself as a pioneer of this and using the EU cohesion transfers and Hungary, as long as member of the EU is legitimizing Hungary. For a long, long time, Freedom House still considered Hungary as a unconsolidated but still democracy. VDEM was quicker to realize it is a more hybrid regime, but I think for political reasons, Freedom House did not want to admit that Hungary is not democracy anymore. They said that it is a partially free regime now, as they call, but it was a sort of imbalanced or weak or unconsolidated democracy for more than 10 years. So therefore, and also the European People's Party played a very dubious role, also legitimizing Fidesz, and Fidesz was part of the European People's Party, the largest faction in the European Parliament, with the 12 representatives. And without Fidesz, maybe the EPP could not have the majority. So it was a real potential for Orbán to blackmail the European People Party. And the leader of the European People Party, I forgot his name now, he was aspiring for being a leader of the EU, and he was depending on Fidesz votes for a while, and he was reluctant to make a break with Fidesz, which only occurred in 2021. And finally, the EU woke up and make a decisive withdrawing for financial support. And also Hungary was more adamant and more open to block some EU sanctions toward Russia. And that is my summary table about the Orbán regime. What I was partly already talking about, the personalism, the discourse, the combination of popular propaganda and mentalities. We elaborate this in the book much more. The governing party is not a party anymore. It is a family party or meeting point for the family and bureaucracy, state party, the servant of power. It is centralized. The ideology is an applied ethnopopulism. The elite behavior is cynicism, cheating, hypocrisy, power for itself and not for any common good. Now Orbán is ready to support the far-right, anti-Hungarian, potentially new prime minister of Romania, which is really the enemy of the Hungarian minorities in Romania. But for Orbán, the Hungarian minorities in Transylvania are not so important than being part of this autocratic international with this new guy. Maybe he will not be elected, we don't know yet. Culturally, patriarchism, anti-gender, social conservatism, it is very much like Donald Trump. This sort of identitarian Christianity. The religion instrumentalized, politicized, nationalized Christianity. Identitarian Christianity, very much pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian, which is strange because the Hungarian right wing was traditionally anti-Semitic, and now Hungary is very safe for people from Israel. The Israel football team is playing its home games in Hungary, for instance. So there is a guarantee for the security for them, and standing up with Netanyahu and Trump, which is interesting. It's again a very pragmatic and contradictory foreign policy, being a friend of Netanyahu and Erdogan at the same time, which is a basic contradiction. and also China, Russia, and Belarus. So the religion is totally contradicting to Pope Francis and to Pope Leo XIV. It is not the real Christianity, it is a nationalized, over-politicized Christianity following the right wing of the US Republican Party, controlled by the church, the identitarian Christian church. Social policy is not populist, it is based on the exclusion of the poor, very much elitist and creating a bigger gap between the rich and the poor. And economic policy is a combination of economic nationalism and neoliberalism. And I were talking about foreign policy. I'm sorry to speak a little bit long, and thank you for listening to me. And thank you again. I finish here. Thanks.
Thank you, András. It was a wonderful, very thorough overview. I think all of us, those who read the book, those who just skimmed through the book, we get a better understanding about the overall concept and your approach with Zoltán Fleck. I have to tell you that the topic and the whole book is very close to my heart, because many of you know that I'm also working on a book which is comparing Poland and Hungary from the perspective of informal power, and András' work is a great inspiration for me. But I don't want to talk more. I would like to pass it on to Andrzej to give his comments, which we're very much looking forward to, and then we're going to have a discussion together. Andrzej, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the seminar. And I'll start also a bit on a personal note. I feel really humbled to be a discussant of the book by András Bozóki. Not only because he is one of the most important analysts of the Orbán's power, he also observed it firsthand, especially in the first years of Fidesz, when he was a member of the party. He soon left, and then he was a minister in the government opposing Fidesz. So I think it brings also a bit of a first-hand experience. And one more disclaimer: I was myself a student of András some 15 years ago at CU in Budapest. So it is the more the pleasure to be here. I think Hungary. I mean, we heard it already. Hungary is a particularly interesting case, and not because we are personally interested in it, but I think it stands out in the EU in many respects, in terms of the nature of the regime, the sliding away from democracy, and the foreign policy also, which is also widely discussed. And obviously it raises many controversies internationally, but it's also a source of inspiration. I mean, we have several leaders in the region, but also in Western Europe and overseas, including Trump, that well, it is debatable to what extent he is inspired by Orbán, but we know there are quite intense contacts and exchanges. So I think it makes it even more necessary to systematically study Orbán's rule. Well, there are recently quite a lot of studies, books on the Orbán's regime. Many of them approach it from more biographical perspective, given the fact that Viktor Orbán is such a sort of central and dominating figure. There were recent books by Paul Lendvai, by Stefano Bottoni. There were several books that approach it from more from particular fields. There were books on corruption by Balint Magyar. There were books on the type of political regime by several authors. I think this book is in my view one of the best studies. I mean, most complex that gives justice to different aspects of the Orban's rule. Um, and I think the concept of embedded autocracy and the more sociological historical approach has a lot of explanatory potential. I mean, what was interesting for me regarding the book that on one hand it focuses on the sort of more traditional political studies approach with the focus on the role of agency, the state capture, the institutional capture, the executive aggrandizement, and many other concepts. But on the other hand, it focuses on maybe less explored aspects of Orban's regime, such as the traditional mentalities, the collective memory, the economic issues, and many other aspects. I think for me particularly interesting was the part on one hand that shows the similarities or the, how shall I say, some kind of inspiration by the far right and the old far, including the far right, not only Jobbik, but what was before. I mean, when I was reading the parts about the Hungarian Life and Justice Party's narrative, the MIP, it was really illuminating to see many patterns, of course, in a less sort of aggressive, radical way presented by Orban in this more kind of mediated way that is more widely acceptable. But the patterns are very similar. The scheme of the global versus Hungarian, right? The kind of opposition that Orban built his narrative upon. Mm, and secondly, I liked a lot the parts on the ideological flexibility and the sort of eclectic political messaging. I think this you know, kind of traveling between Christianity and paganism, between neoliberalism and statism, between victimhood and the national grandeur, and how Orban's narratives and the whole propaganda machinery is able to kind of combine these different messages that are seemingly contradictory, but somehow uh, works well for the for the party in power, and somehow addresses different parts of the society with different kind of mentalities and sensitivities. Um, I would have, I think, four questions to ask regarding different aspects of the book. First, a bit chronologically relates to how much Hungary was actually a consolidated democracy before 2010. I mean, the book perfectly describes the period between 2006 and 10, when somehow the perfect storm for autocratization began with economic, political crisis, identity crisis, etc. But I was wondering also from your personal experience whether there were some earlier signs of kind of weak embeddedness of uh, democracy. Did you have actually some red flags during these years that actually it can develop in this direction? Um, my second question would be about the sort of international context. I mean, the book rightly, I think, uh, identifies the role of external environment for autocratization and democratization. and Hungary is, of course, a part of a wider trend. But I was thinking also to what extent actually the external context helped Orbán to kind of relativize the nature of the regime. I mean, because still comparing to other countries not far away from Hungary, Turkey, Russia, Belarus, etc., Orbán's regime seems as a sort of soft autocracy, and it, I think, raises an important question: how much these scholarly definitions that we saw a lot of them are understandable for the lay people, and how much through this sort of incremental autocratization and this kind of international context, Orbán was able to show that actually nothing serious is happening. That is actually actually a process that does not lead to real autocracy. Also, given the fact that in the countries of the region, with the turbulent past, with the totalitarian experience, it's probably easy to neglect these warning signs, and these kind of incremental changes do not seem as serious. So I would be interested in your view on that. One more question about the international context or the EU context, because I mean, obviously the EU was incapable to impact the situation for a long time. Now it has a much more powerful tool, the freezing of the EU funds. But the question is whether it can really affect the situation in Hungary, because it seems to be that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, that on the one hand, the EU have a perfect instrument to pressure Orbán, maybe in the policy issues, etc. But it's difficult probably to foresee that it will bring a systematic change, that it can really affect the way how Orbán and his power operates. So, and further on, it seems that Orbán can adapt to it easily and to even use this additional EU pressure for his own goals. This is something I heard recently from somebody from, let's say, Fidesz circles, that, well, if the funds are blocked, we have a problem, we have less money, but on the other hand, it builds in perfectly into the narrative of the bad EU that is repressing Hungarians, and somehow electorally we can still make use of it. So I was wondering, how do you see the role of the EU in the coming months? And final question. Well, it's not part of the book, of course. The book was finished in January 2024, as far as I remember. But how do you see the potential of a change in Hungary regarding Peter Magyar and his movement? To what extent do you see that actually it is still possible to win the election, and whether a peaceful sort of transition of power is still in the embedded autocracy possible? So I'll stop here and looking forward to the discussion.
András, right back at you. Right back at you.
Yes, I try to be very quick. Thank you for these questions, and thank you for following me in this road. How much Hungary was consolidated democracy? Well, retrospectively, I should say that we believed in that, and we believed on these institutes who measured that, and they had this checklist approach, you know, that you have constitutional court, you have ombudsman, you have NGOs, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, functioning opposition, competitive system. So what else do you want? So these things were misleading actually, because political scientists and other observers, analysts tended to say, okay, then we are on the way. Of course, nothing is perfect. Democracy is an imperfect system. We have some child diseases like, high unemployment rate, for instance, in the 1990s, high inflation at the beginning of the economic transformation. But there was an overarching optimism that there is a direction there is a movement to the good direction. So somehow consolidated democracy was anticipated. And, Adam Przeworski, the famous Polish sociologist, said that democracy is a system where parties or governments lose elections. And the governments lost elections in 94, 98, 2010. So like in Poland, so peaceful transfer of power, separation of the bureaucracy from the policymakers. And of course, there was corruption, but corruption is difficult because corruption exists in Italy, in Greece, in a lot of other countries. If there is a high corruption rate, it does not disqualify a country as not being democracy from the start. But now, today, the corruption is not the exception from the norms, but this is the norm. So it is a systemic corruption, an elite corruption, top-down corruption that is the most poisonous and most damaging. So if you want a honest answer, I think I should be also self-critical, because I also wanted to believe that this is a consolidated democracy. All sources, domestic and Western sources, reinforced this belief. And there was a foreign direct investment in Hungary. The foreign capital inflow to Hungary was great in the 1990s. It was considered as a safe place for investments. So actually, my own experience was the first which changed a little bit my mind. When I was a member of the government and as a minister of culture, I traveled a lot to the Hungarian countryside. And that was a new experience for me. I originally grew up partly in Budapest, but partly in a countryside city. But I never systematically traveled to the country before. I mean, I was teaching in the Central European University and Eötvös Loránd University as a professor, so my experience were coming from Budapest and based on Budapest, and that is, as we know, it's very different also in Warsaw vis-a-vis some Polish countryside villages. So maybe my perception was also distorted. And as I traveled to little villages in eastern part of Hungary or northern part of Hungary, I realized that, the social conditions of a functioning democracy is very weak. There is poverty, there is a servitude. I gave an interview to a journalist of a local newspaper, and then the mayor of that little town came there and told the journalist, okay, when the minister leaves, I want to see the interview text. So there was a practice of censorship which was hidden at that time. So my own practical life opened up my eyes, and I realized that I was a sort of optimistic liberal in the 1990s, and over the 2000s, I realized that if we want to live in a free society, a free democracy, then the society must be more equal, and such an inequality will not produce a functioning democracy. So I was moving a little bit to the left, from pure liberalism to left liberalism, social democracy. Okay, the wider trend, yes, absolutely. Orbán could relativize the nature of the regime. So the reason why he makes friendship with sometimes with Meloni or Salvini or the Dutch guy who was successful in the Netherlands, or sometimes visiting Johnson and Trump in the first place. He wants to prove that he is an international leader. He is participating in the broad international debate to make a camouflage, to hide what is going on domestically in Hungary. So hypocrisy is a inherent part of the regime. Just as I was a bit misled, I have to say autocritically, in the period of the Gyurcsány and Bajnai, believing that the situation is more democratic than it was in practice. Many people believe that in reality it is still a democracy, the Orbán regime, and not just a facade. And it is very difficult to have a resistance in a hybrid regime. If you have a clear-cut dictatorship, you know it is a morally clear situation. You are either corrupt or on the wrong side, or you are on the good side in the opposition, morally. So that there were my heroes in the democratic opposition in the 90s. They were not only political opposition, but they were morally the good people. But in a hybrid regime, you know, many people were sitting in the opposition parties, sitting in the Orbán's parliament. And they were really, some of them were corrupted or co-opted, but other people were really truly honest and tried to oppose the regime. And they were radicalizing. And they were losing their instruments because against the two-third majority, they couldn't do anything. And you know, losing an election 2018, 2022, and people from outside, they said that this is just a fake opposition. What are you playing with us? Why not go out to the streets and being like real opposition? So I think that's the secret of Peter Magyar, that he can say that I am not sitting in the parliament, because in the meantime, during these 14 years, those who were sitting in the parliament, maybe they were totally honest and driven by goodwill, but still their perception was somehow misled them to believe that they are doing a useful work against the system. They were against the government, but finally part of the system. So it's a very, very difficult moral choice what to do. And the Orbán regime raised the salary of the members of the parliament. So they receive a very decent salary, much higher salary than in my time a minister received. So that's the way to corrupt the opposition parties, giving them high salaries and depriving the party from private support. So they have to use this money to maintain the party. So it's a real moral dilemma, and Orbán was very clever to relativize the real nature of the regime. Third question, the EU freezing the funds, double-edged sword. I completely agree. We try to warn about this in our article with Hegedűs, that maybe it will be too late. So if the EU funds are stopped in 2016, that could have been a different impact, a real impact. But now Orbán just doesn't care. As your information is correct, I think his main concern is to stay in power at whatever cost. So, and that is very scary actually, because then the Russian spies are there in the Hungarian foreign ministry. And 10 years ago, Hungary was compared to Poland in sort of backsliding. And today Hungary is compared to Serbia with good reason. So there is a lot of similarities between Hungary and Serbia. And Romania is much more democratic, by the way. So we don't know what will happen. So there is a continuous backsliding, and the EU cannot reverse it from outside. So Orbán is not interested to give the opportunity of Erasmus fund for the young people. He is buying a university in Vienna and supported by his own think tank, the MCC. So it's the question of taxpayers' money, and the country is becoming poorer and poorer, but still he still have enough money to stay in power. So this the regime can only be changed domestically from inside. It's an illusion that if Trump loses and Biden or anybody else will come back, it will be different. So without a determination of a local domestic civil society cannot be changed. External actors cannot take it over. However, the EU can help if there would be a very tense moment after the elections. Péter Magyar is doing a great job in mobilizing the Hungarian mentality and pointing out the lies of the Orbán regime and the elite corruption, because now everybody feels it. 10 years ago it was not so obvious. Even 5 years ago it was not obvious. Why? Because there was an economic development. And people can tolerate an autocratizing regime as long as there is an economic development and they can afford better life for themselves. And since COVID and the war, the Hungarian economy is in ruins. There is it is more stagnation, and it is getting weaker and weaker, maybe on the same level like Bulgaria in the European Union. So that is a social psychological moment when a new politicians, a new challenger could come in the right moment. It is a historic luck. I mean, he is a smart guy, but he was entering in a lucky moment. And there was a moral outrage, in this pedophile scandal. And Orbán really felt that it is serious and quickly kicked out the justice minister and even the president. So the change is possible. I cannot predict violence or non-violence. I believe that the Hungarian political culture is basically non-violent. So I think that I have some sources that Hungarian police is not really happy with the regime, and the Hungarian military also not. Frankly, I cannot imagine that Hungarian boys in military, soldiers, killing protesters. It's quite incredible. I can't believe in that. But of course, anything can happen. Somebody can make a murder, assassination. It's so easy in this technological level of development to kill somebody. There is a total surveillance using Pegasus and other methods. So it's really easy to create a scandal around Péter Magyar. There is the most rigorous law against drugs, against drug users in Europe, in Hungary. So imagine, so it is not drug dealers, but even if you have a little amount of marijuana at home, it is already a crime. So Péter Magyar can go out from home and the secret police can put a little bit of drug into this house, and he can be taken as a criminal to jail. And it is possible to jail him before the election. But that would be pretty much a Russian method, and that is dangerous to the regime because they can provoke a popular resistance. I mean, if this is the most popular party at the moment in Hungary, so if they jail Péter Magyar, it can lead to unpredictable consequences for the regime. So I think they should be very cautious. And there is another explanation. My former colleague and friend Gábor Tóka, who said that actually there is a deep state already there. Orbán has the constitutional court, the judiciary, everything, the economic leaders, incredible amount of money, all the hospital directors and school directors, everything. So there is a centralized vertical system. So Orbán can afford to lose the election. That is, Gábor suggests that, okay, what happens if he loses the election? The new government cannot do anything, especially if they don't have 2/3. And they can just prove that the new government is equally incompetent, and he can come back after maybe 2 years or even earlier. So there is a danger that the new government cannot govern, and this is the moment when the EU can significantly help to make the new government able to govern in some ways with the creative legislation. I think they already helped the Polish government of Donald Tusk to recover. So therefore, I think a peaceful transition is possible. Maybe Orbán likes to present himself as a democrat, whatever it means. So, you know, shooting to the people and killing people like Ceausescu, I think it is not part of his repertoire and will not be part of the repertoire, but he is preparing for many things. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, András, for this very sobering concluding remarks. I see a hand raised from Andrzej Wardomacki, so please come forward with your question.
Thank you, really, Professor, for your speech. I very impressed your brilliant work with definitions and many verbs before the word of democracy, which can clarify this notion. I'm sociologist, and I have a professional question to you. First question, can you say a few words about dynamics of geopolitical orientations of Hungarian people last years? I mean, preferences in favor of union with European Union or with Russian Federation. And the second part of the question, I'm interested about of the wording of the question which Hungarian sociologists asked in their polls. If it's possible to send through or organize. Thank you very much in advance.
Sorry, I was writing down your first question. What was your second question, please?
Second question. I have practical professional interest as sociologist. The wording of questions of Hungarian sociologists when they asked about geopolitical orientations of Hungarian people. You understand what I mean?
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, András, sorry, just hold on a second,
okay.
because I think I'm going to collect one more, because I see Marta Spała also raising a hand, and Joanna Fomina. So let at least gather a round more of questions, and then please get back to them, and then Joanna will close the round.
Of course.
Thank you. Marta, please.
Okay, thank you for great presentation. It's like I'm dealing with Serbia, so you know, it's very, from this point of view, methodological point of view, it's very inspiring. So yeah, I have like more maybe sociological question, but I'm thinking like when we are thinking about like comparing to regime, and I'm mainly now working on the grassroots movements in Serbia, and now we have the protests which are a result of this new grassroots movements which are present there. I wanted to ask you 3 questions. One is about sphere of freedom. So Serbian regime is very totalitarian. In a sense, they want to control everything, like to the very local. I don't know. They have this idea of community council in the small villages, and the government, like the party, because party in Serbia is very important. Party wants to control it all, and all areas of social activities. So I would like to ask you, like, is still, or if there are any areas of freedom in Hungary, how the system operates, how much totalitarian it is, how much it wants to control the social activity of the society. The second thing is about mechanism of conflict resolution, in the sense that even if autocratarian societies in Serbia and also in Hungary, we have the social conflict. I don't know. Let's take it from Serbia. It's about construction of roads, like development of the municipalities. It's like on this very small level. So how because Serbian government is very arrogant. They don't want society influence, society participation. They don't care what society thinks. Like how it is in Hungary. If there is a problem with, I don't know, garbage collection in the small village, how it is resolved, if the government is willing to adjust to some level or not at all. So because now also when I think about Serbia, how this big protest movement came from, it's just because they were neglecting all these small things, and you know, now we have the big protest based on this small grievance on the local level. And the third thing is about economy also, because you also said that corruption is systemic, and we know how the corruption works, but also coming to the local level. And my experience from Serbia, like there was like video from Serbia protests lately, and somebody said, you know, Milosevic, he was really dealing with petrol and drugs, and these guys, they want to control everything, starting from construction, obvious, but also, you know, they are going to the ground and they want to take, let's say, corruption rent, even on the small milk producers, you know, people who are producing small amount of, I don't know, fruits for the market. They want this total control. So this is also the question, like how it is in Hungary, if it's possible to do the business in Hungary without dealing with the regime. And yeah, if there is, let's say, IT sector is usually quite independent, but how much freedom small enterprise have if they also have to adjust and subordinate to the party interest, or if there is small freedom. So how deep to the society corruption goes. Thank you.
Professor Fomina, please also, I think it's best if you jump on board, yes, and then we close this round.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much again, András. This was really very, very insightful, very interesting. And, you know, I was just making comparisons with other countries that I'm, you know, still familiar of and have been studying. But I want to go back to something that already was touched by Andrzej Sadecki, which is the role of the EU. So we've talked about, you know, how now it's too late for the EU to act and constrain Hungary, and there is a need for the need for the change from inside. But can we also speak about some lessons for the EU in terms of reactions to the cases of democratic backsliding in other countries? Can we see this right balance between the normative and pragmatic approaches? Like what should we do in case we see new Orbáns in other EU states? As you know, definitely there are many admirers of his strategy, and so how exactly should EU react at what point, if you see, you know, if there is some sort of more universal formula. And another one is you spoke and wrote, of course, a lot about the societal and cultural aspects in building and maintaining support for autocratic leaders. So you also mentioned at some point the role of grievances. And of course, we also know from not just from Hungary, but other countries that this role of this discourse of grievances, resentment, this interplay between the victimhood and national grandeur is quite a typical instrument exploited by autocratic leaders. But could you just elaborate a little bit on the particular grievances that resonate strongly within the Hungarian society? Thank you.
András, you got a huge bunch of questions. So feel free to cherry pick.
Yes.
And
yes, thank you very much. Thank you for those insightful, very interesting question. The first question, dynamic of geopolitical orientation among the Hungarian people. Well, the good news is that the European Union is popular and probably even more popular than it was 5 years ago, because now there is a war in Ukraine, there is a real stake. People feel that it is a crucial point that we have to decide whether we go back to the east, to Russia, former Soviet Union, or stay in the EU. And in the meantime, hundreds of thousands of Hungarians are working abroad in Austria, Germany, England, Scandinavia. So it is an everyday experience for Hungarian families that at least one family member is not living in Hungary but somewhere else. So there are Zoom meetings between family members and visiting each other. You know, grandchildren are au paired by grandma in West Germany or Denmark. So there is a linkage. Now, a leverage may be, the impact of the EU might be small, but the everyday linkage is on the level of society is very strong. So that gives me optimism. And people tend to understand the danger that it is impossible to go back the pre-Schengen era, or to go back to the Iron Curtain era when we could not cross the border. I mean, that would really create a revolution when the regime really hurts the private life of Hungarian families. So I think Hungary supports the EU membership, NATO, and the Western orientation. Orbán cannot change this now. Orbán wants to restrict the freedom of assembly and protest, and he attacked, as he believed, the popular target, this Pride, LGBT group. He likes to attack defenseless minorities. That is his strategy, and to divide the society, and claiming that those are drug users and pedophiles, and they pose a danger to our children, and so on. So trying to contrast the Hungarian families vis-a-vis the LGBTQ community, which is something like the creation of the sinful West. And by doing so, actually, the toleration of LGBTQ people became higher in Hungary. So more people will participate in the coming Pride than ever, because it is now a political event. It is not only for those minorities, but also it is a act of resistance against the regime. So I think it is it can have a boomerang effect for Orbán to attack these groups. And there are a lot of young people who grew up in the Orbán regime, and they are traveling feeling free in the West, and they see the striking difference between Germany and Hungary in that respect. For instance, the toleration of sexual differences and other things. So therefore, socially, there is a potential resistance. The wording of the questions, I am not an empirical sociologist. I am sorry, I cannot give you a credible answer, Andrzej. I think maybe Edith knows this better because she has connects to political capital relations to some empirical research and polling institutions, Republican. There are several polling institutions, but these are, I don't say these are less reliable, but they are more politicized and they are constantly under stress. I don't know how they are asking these questions. I would be myself interested. And for the question of Marta, fear of freedom, social activities, to what extent local entrepreneurs are independent of Fidesz? I think Fidesz tried to create deep roots to the local society. They try to make a vertical system which goes down to the little village as well, and therefore the opposition was helpless because the local mayors were, if not members of Fidesz, that they were friendly to Fidesz because the redistribution of the benefits were depending on their political behavior. So that was the way that, you have to harmonize your behavior with Fidesz, and then you will get some funds. The Roma population will be compensated, the mayors, etc. But now my feedback is that also I rely on research on Imre Kovács and others, that the local entrepreneurs are fed up with Fidesz control in smaller towns and villages. This is still the stronghold of Fidesz. The village people, the uneducated, those who are not traveling, they don't speak foreign languages, and the elderly population. But this can be a smaller cohort, and if the local elite rebels against this party control, that can give a hope. Unfortunately, there is not much bottom-up social activities, which existed non-political bottom-up activities in the Kadar regime, helping each other, building up each other's houses for free work, offering it. Kalaka, that was called in the 1980s, a big topic for sociologists, but this does not exist. The society is much more fragmented since that time, and these local solidarity networks are weaker than they were before. But maybe I do not have totally updated knowledge about this, and maybe there is some local organization. And Peter Magyar is also clever on this because there is a Tisza party, that is his own party, and independent of this, there is a sort of civil circles or little bit of local movements called Tisza Islands. And Tisza Islands are not controlled by the party or by the politician. This is a natural pool, natural reservoir for future opposition activists and politicians. So it's quite good to separate the political level from the civic level, because the civic level will support the opposition at the end. And these people can say that we are not member of an opposition party, so don't harass us. So they try to get out from the Fidesz harassment on local level. The government is not so much ready to respond to this, although there are some increasing local conflicts, especially when the government want to set some new factories, a Chinese investment, to accumulator factories, which will hurt the environment, the green environment, and probably these people will not have natural water. So this real danger bring together the village people, and they are protesting around Debrecen, for instance, or around other people. So, and that is something that the government cannot neglect, but they are not very good in coordinating or negotiating anything with local people. Um, um, I would say that Fidesz try to control the local entrepreneurs, but they are less and less able to do this. This is not a totalitarian regime. So when I talk about elite corruption and economic entrepreneurs and mafia state, it is maybe the 20% of the society. And there are other persons who try to survive, lower middle classes, young people, pensioners, and they are not member of this mafia. And also the local entrepreneurs are more and more independent of Fidesz. And so this deep state is not that deep as in a totalitarian regime. So there is some more room. They can do their own living if they are smart enough. And as for the economy, the EU funds are still going to the economy, to the agriculture particularly. So the point is that the agriculture is also centralized, and larger part of these EU funds are taken over by these agricultural investors, the rich people. Now the daughter of Viktor Orbán is buying a huge land in southwest Hungary, and they in the hope to benefit again from the EU funds. So the agricultural elite gets these EU funds, and much less goes to the real people who working there, the peasants and entrepreneurs. And very important question is about the EU, as we discussed that it is maybe too late for ACT, but maybe they should prepare for a turmoil situation, like in Belgrade or in Tbilisi. It can happen in Hungary as well, and the political activity of the EU will be crucial. Maybe we can say that EU should act not anymore for Hungary, because Hungary is difficult to change, but for their own identity. If the European Union want to keep itself as a credible democratic actor, they have to fight for their own identity, that we are on the good side. And I understand that in politics, and European Union is a political body also, there is a room for pragmatism and compromise and even some dirty steps. I am relatively tolerant to this, but they cannot give up their identity. They cannot give up their credibility, because if they do, then Orbán will be victorious. So even if it hurts me as a Hungarian citizen that it is blocked, the monies are blocked, and my students cannot go to Erasmus Fund. But I am not teaching there in those foundational universities, but my colleague students are hurt. Still, I think it is, on the longer run, it is important when Hungary will be re-democratizing again, which will happen, I believe, sooner or later, then Hungary should be a respected member of a democratic EU and not a corrupt EU. So the activity of EU is to save its own soul, to save its own credibility, and it's to set a pattern, and that's important, I think. Even if on the short term we lose, then we have to be proud that the EU is faithful to its principles. And the EU is in a big trouble, because the EU was not designed for this. The EU was designed for peace, security, and economic development, and increasing freedom. So all the good things of the liberal order. And now, for the first time, they have have to act like real politicians and not just bureaucrats and coordinators in Brussels. They have to say something, whether are we on the side of Russia or Ukraine. I mean, it's a black and white case. You cannot be on both sides at the same time. And again, Orbán will pose a difficult challenge to the EU if he is going to continue this policy. So therefore, it's vital to make some change. And last question: the grievances, victimhood, which resonate. Hungary is the only country which became independent and not being happy with it. When Croatia became independent, or Slovenia, Poland, already 1918, and again after the communist period, it was a moment of joy. For the Slovaks, let's show how we can produce ourselves as an independent nation. For the Czechs, for the Baltic states, it is an identity formation. When nationalism and democracy can go together. National identity can be a democratic identity. But in Hungary, the national independence was like a treason of the liberals and communists and the West. So it was a feeling of defeat. Rather than being happy to be an independent country, suddenly Hungarians found themselves in a small country from this imperial Austrian-Hungarian dual monarchy, which misrepresented the real influence of Hungary. Hungary so-called lost Transylvania, Slovakia, and Vojvodina, and so on. So it was a feeling of defeat. And this is something that the far right is always riding this horse. That, there is a need for revenge. We will get back those territories, allying with Hitler, getting back northern Transylvania and some parts of Slovakia, etc. And then there was a taboo. This issue was taboo. And afterwards, Churka was talking about it, and the far right about Hungarian identity vis-a-vis liberal democracy. So progress and patriotism was somehow always in conflict. And therefore, Orbán, who says that we are alone, we are the victims of the little Entente, we are the victims. The European Union is just the new little Entente, and everybody is against us. It's strange because when I was traveling to Armenia, the Armenian identity is also like everybody is against us. And Azerbaijan also, everybody is against us. Georgia, Serbia. So it is not typical Hungarian things, but the Hungarians believe that we are the ultimate losers of history. So we like to be sort of happy with our poverty and losing. So this pessimism, this is part of the political culture. I am just back from Philadelphia from a conference, and it was so refreshing to go to a supermarket and they asked me, "Hi, how are you?" That was, I mean, and I said, "Fine." I mean, if you ask the same question in Hungary, you will get a long list of grievances and victimhood. So it is very familiar in Hungary that we have to compensate. We have to compensate the lost territories, and I think there is an ongoing rumor and about Orbán's secret plans together with Putin to take some territories back from Ukraine, because that's the ultimate goal of Orbán. If he goes down to history as someone who became Hungary bigger, let's make Hungary great again, then he would be on the positive side of history, and all of these autocracies will be forgiven to him. So it's a tiny little territory, this Transcarpathian territory, there are more Ukrainians and Hungarians mostly left, but still in this mythology of the far right, and Orbán is in the far right, it is still a mythic land which can be recovered as part of Hungary, and that could be one part of the reason why he is so close to Putin, but I think there are several other things that we don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, András, for patiently answering all the questions, all great ones. I would like to wrap it up because we are way beyond the time. Maybe just probably a quick note from our colleague from CU Democracy Institute, Edgar Szár, left you, András, a note in the chat. He had to leave, unfortunately. He said that in comparison between Hungary and Turkey, the issue of violence is often a first thing mentioned. And Professor Bozóki noted that Orbán has so far refrained from using this violence due to his dependence on the EU funds. But I believe the Turkish experience shows that such regime remain non-violent only as long as they have no need to act otherwise. If staying in power, which is the sole objective of these leaders like Erdogan and Orbán, requires violence, they usually do not hesitate, as current developments in Turkey also demonstrate. He wanted to thank you for your presentation. I think it's another sobering note to wrap up it with. But definitely an important one. So thank you so much, András, again for presenting the book.
Let me say just one word. At the beginning, you mentioned that you have a lot of questions to me, so we have to find an opportunity.
Exactly. I could go on for another 2 hours
to talk about it.
Discuss the book. Probably we need to find another platform for that.
And indeed, the similarities and differences between Hungary and Turkey is striking. I think Erdogan can afford to use force. Orbán cannot at the moment, but we don't know in the future. And thank you, Andrzej, for your comments. And we have to catch up. Please send me your email and everybody to come here. And I'm glad to see Bernadette Sale here among us. He used to be a visiting lecturer at CEU recently, so we met in Vienna like 1.5 months ago, and a former opposition politician also. So a lot of experience. Maybe she has more experience on the countryside politics than I have, but maybe next time. Thank you.
We were very happy to have you. I will be glad to put you in touch with Andrzej and the rest of the colleagues. So please.
And of course, Joanna also. Andrzej and Joanna.
Goes without saying. I'll put everybody in touch with everybody. Thank you, András. Thank you, Andrzej, very much. Thank you for all of you for staying us for almost 2 hours and for your great questions. Please stay tuned for the upcoming seminars that we are going to present in the upcoming months, including speakers having Bernadette Sale on board, but also Edgar Szár, who just left this note in the chat box for András. So we're going to have some very interesting events in the upcoming weeks too. Stay with us and all the best in the meantime. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you.